You think being smart protects you? That's the biggest lie society ever sold. Have you ever noticed? Every smart person is tired. They talk properly. They act properly. They live as if someone's always watching. But behind that polished intelligence hides one quiet fear, the fear that they might not actually know anything. The world worships the wise. But Machiavelli once laughed and said, "When a man tries too hard to appear wise, that's when he's most foolish." We've turned intelligence into a mask. We don't seek truth anymore. We just fear being wrong. We study to defend ourselves, not understand. And each day the mind grows sharper while the heart runs dry. There's a paradox Machiavelli understood better than anyone. The one who dares to look foolish often sees farther than the rest. Because the fool isn't afraid of laughter. He's free. He doesn't perform. He simply is. And in that raw honesty, he becomes stronger than any smart man trembling behind a mass of intellect. When you stop trying to look intelligent, you don't become stupid. You simply start to see the truths that the intelligent no longer have the courage to face. And that's where the real journey begins. The journey of the awakened fool. There's a kind of fear modern people never dare to admit. The fear of looking stupid. It seeps into every conversation, every email, every post. Everyone's trying to sound informed, quoting, debating, analyzing, commenting. But the harder they try to prove how smart they are, the clearer becomes their suffocating in the need to be seen. Machiavelli once said, "Men would rather be hated than despised." And no one is more despised than the one who looks foolish. So we put on the mask of intelligence. We say things we don't feel, pretend certainty about things we don't understand, and hide our deepest fear. I don't know anything. But here's the irony. The moment you fear looking foolish, you lose the ability to truly learn. Because real wisdom begins in emptiness. No old knowledge, no bias, no act, just a humble curiosity of someone brave enough not to know. Aren't you tired of always being right? Of always knowing how to speak, how to think, how to stay silent just to please the world? That's not intelligence. That's slavery to an image. We fear stupidity so much that we lose our freedom. We silence ourselves with knowledge and call it maturity. But true maturity isn't knowing more. It's having the courage to say, "I was wrong." Machiavelli knew this game too well. He lived among the powerful, the scholars, the self-proclaimed wise. But he saw they were puppets controlled by fear. Fear of mockery, fear of losing status, fear of admitting the fool within. So he chose another path, to become a voluntary fool. The voluntary fool has the right to observe, the right to step back from the stage of intellect and see the real board beneath the performance. Have you noticed how the smartest people are often the quietest? Not because they have nothing to say, but because they know most human speech is just a shield. Every "I know" is a brick covering an empty heart, but only when you dare to remove those bricks, when you let the world see your imperfection, do you finally begin to live. There's an old saying, the wise build walls, the fool opens doors. It sounds ridiculous, but Machiavelli would whisper, that foolish door is where true wisdom enters. Because only the fool sees what the wise refuse to face. That intelligence doesn't save you from fear. It only makes your fear more sophisticated. So, if today you find yourself trying to look smart, stop. Look around you. Look into your own mind. All that cleverness you're trying so hard to prove is just a mask about to crack. And sometimes the wisest thing you can do is take that mask off and breathe like a free fool. Do you know what makes the fool the most dangerous of all? It's not that he's smarter than you. It's that he isn't afraid of looking stupid. This world shackles you with fear. Don't do that. You look dumb. Don't ask that. Everyone already knows it. Don't get it wrong. People will laugh. But the fool doesn't care. He asks the questions others are too afraid to ask. He does the things others only dare to imagine. He speaks the truths the smart hide to protect their reputation. And that's why he's free. While the wise imprison themselves behind their own massive intellect, the fool walks straight into the storm, laughing as he burns the rules the crowd worships. Freedom doesn't begin when you know everything. Freedom begins when you're no longer afraid to be wrong. When you stop obsessing over being right, you start observing without defense. You start listening without preparing a counter. You start living as if every experience were the first. That's the power of the awakened fool. Not ignorance, but a mind untouched, unshaped, unconditioned. The wise act from experience. The fool acts from instinct. And sometimes instinct is truer than memory. There's an image Machiavelli loved. The jester in the royal court, the only one allowed to tell the king the truth, because no one fears a fool. While courtiers tremble, searching for the words to please power, the fool plays with power itself. He's not bound by roles or by status. And that very lack of chains makes him the only free man in the palace. The world today is no different. You can have money, fame, education. But if you don't dare to be seen as stupid, you're still a slave to the eyes of others. Want to know where you're chained? It's simple. Look at what you're most afraid of people thinking. That's where you lost your freedom first. The fool doesn't need to pretend. He doesn't need praise. He doesn't need to win. He only needs to experience. And in every experience, he becomes untouchable. Machiavelli once wrote, "He who can laugh in adversity escapes the control of fate." That's the philosophy of the fool. The one no longer tied to outcomes, to images, to opinions. When you dared be foolish once, you discover something shocking. No one actually cares as much as you thought. The world isn't watching you. It's only reflecting your own fear. And when you let go, when you stop fighting to be right, something strange happens. You begin to be right naturally. Because true intelligence needs no display. It needs no praise, no approval. It lives in silence. In the eyes of the fool who smiles at a world taking itself too seriously, the fool is free because he has nothing to lose. And for that reason, he's the one person who can never be controlled. When you hear the word ignorance, what comes to mind? A fool, a failure, someone to pity or mock. That's how the world is programmed to react. Because no one wants to face the truth that all wisdom begins in ignorance. No child is born intelligent. No philosopher begins with certainty. Every mind starts from emptiness, a humble not knowing, open enough to learn. But as we grow older, we begin to fear that emptiness. We try to fill it with books, with titles, with degrees, and we call that wisdom. But that's not wisdom. That's just armor for the ego. Have you ever met someone so intelligent they can no longer listen? They react before they understand. They judge before they observe. And while they're busy trying to win a conversation, they've already lost the search for truth. The fool is different. He doesn't need to win. He just wants to know. And because he isn't afraid to be wrong, he learns more than anyone else. Socrates once said, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing." The world called him a fool, but that conscious ignorance became the highest form of wisdom. What we call intelligence is often just educated arrogance. People read to avoid listening. They study to avoid experiencing. They analyze until they forget how to feel. You can know every theory about love and still not know how to love. You can understand every philosophy of life and still not know how to live. That's the tragedy of the wise. They understand everything except themselves. When Machiavelli studied people, he didn't ask who's right. He asked who's lying to themselves. And the answer was always the same: the smartest person in the room. Because only the fool is humble enough to see the truth. Only the fool is curious enough to ask why. Only the fool dares to step where the wise refuse to go, where mistakes, shame, and imperfection wait. While the wise stand outside analyzing, the fool jumps in and lives. And through that raw experience, he becomes wiser than any book could ever teach. The wise want to control the world. The fool just wants to understand it. That's why the wise suffer, and the fool smiles. The wise live in fear of being wrong. The fool lives in the joy of discovery. There's a kind of wisdom no book can teach, the wisdom of honest ignorance. No masks, no performance, no pretending to be enough. Just, I don't know, but I want to understand. And in that very moment when you dare not to know, when you let everything collapse, true intelligence begins to form. The fool understands something the wise always forget. The path to wisdom always begins with shame. You must be ashamed to be wrong, ashamed to be ignorant, ashamed to see how ordinary you truly are. But if you can walk through that shame, you cross to the other side of awareness where only silence remains. And in that silence, the noise of the world fades away. There's only you and the quiet laughter of the fool smiling at himself. There's a bitter paradox in this world. The smarter people become, the easier they are to deceive, not because they lack intellect, but because they believe in it too much. The intelligent have one fatal weakness. They need be right. They need to prove they see farther than everyone else. And that very need makes them perfect prey for anyone who knows how to flatter their ego. They no longer see the world with their eyes, but to the filter of their own prejudice, polished and packaged under the name of understanding. When a new idea appears, they don't listen to understand. They listen to refute. When truth knocks, they don't open the door. They defend their intellectual territory like a religion. Machiavelli once wrote, "He who believes he knows everything loses the ability to observe." That's why the smartest are often the most blind to their own arrogance, blind to human feeling, blind to the small, silent things that logic can never measure. Have you noticed those who love to analyze others are often the ones who understand themselves the least? They dissect every behavior, every motive, but never dare to face the darkness within. They talk about psychology, philosophy, perception, power, but never realize that every word they speak is just another way of hiding from the truth that knowledge doesn't make us more human, not if it's just a wall between us and real experience. Machiavelli never glorified the fool. He glorified the man who could drop his intellect and see the world with naked eyes. He knew wisdom isn't in knowing more, but in knowing when to let go of what you know. The intelligent make plans. The wise observe. The fool acts. And sometimes a foolish act is the only way out of the darkness. Think back for a moment. How many times in your life did you know the right thing and still feel empty? How many times did you win the argument, but lose yourself in the process? That's when you realize intellect isn't enough. It can protect you from mistakes, but it can also imprison you in safety until you forget how to live. The smarter you are, the less you dare to live. The more you fear risk, the more you lose freedom. The more you know, the less you feel the world. The intelligent believe they see everything, yet their own light blinds them to the simple truths. Their brilliance becomes so bright that they can no longer see the darkness, the very place where true wisdom is born. Someone once said, when the mind becomes too bright, the soul begins to dry. And that is the tragedy of our age. We have data, we have technology, we have answers to every question. And yet we no longer know how to live, how to love, how to believe. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "Clarity will not save the faint-hearted, because power, love, and freedom never belong to those who only analyze. They belong to those who dare to move, even when they know they might be wrong. And perhaps only when you finally stop, when you admit you don't see as clearly as you think, when you realize your own intellect is betraying you, does the true light begin to shine? Not the light of reason, but the light of humility, the one thing the intelligent lose first. The more you know, the less you live. That is the tragedy of the modern man. And when that light fades, humans begin to laugh. Not because they're happy, but because they've forgotten how to cry. There's a kind of person the world will never understand. The ones who make others laugh while falling apart inside. They are the jesters, the professional fools, the entertainers of the crowd. But behind the bright paint and the playful mask lies a cold truth. Sometimes laughter is the only way to survive. Machiavelli once said, "No one believes the tears of the wise, but everyone laughs with the fool." The fool has a strange kind of genius. He knows how to hide pain behind a smile, so the world stops fearing him. And in doing so, he survives where the serious ones would die of despair. Have you ever laughed while your soul was falling apart? Laughed because there was no other choice? That's the oldest survival instinct of the human spirit. Laughter stops being joy. It becomes a weapon. The jester isn't stupid. He simply knows that if he cries, the world will step on him. But if he laughs, the world will pause even for a moment and look at him. And in that moment, he's free. In the Middle Ages, the fool was the only servant who could say whatever he wanted. Only he could mock the king. Only he could touch the truth. People laughed, but deep down they knew, behind every joke was a curse. A lonely soul speaking truth among pretenders. That image still lives today in artists, in storytellers, in those who make others laugh. They turn their pain into philosophy, their wounds into wisdom for crowd, and then return to their room to sit in silence. Maybe you've done the same. You've hidden your exhaustion behind a light remark, placed a smile on your face like a shield, and whispered to yourself, "I'm fine." But deep down, you know you're not fine at all. That isn't weakness. It's the art of survival in a world that punishes vulnerability. Because the fool knows if he exposes his pain, he'll be crushed. But if he laughs, he masters it. His laughter becomes his way of controlling fate. That's why the fool in Machiavelli's world isn't a happy man. He's a man who knows the price of freedom. Freedom doesn't come from joy. It comes from the power to turn pain into strength without begging for pity. The laughter of the jester isn't meaningless. It's a ritual against despair, a form of spiritual strategy, a silent declaration. I'm still here and you can't kill me with sorrow. The world worships fake smiles, but it fears the real ones because a real smile often hides eyes that have seen hell. The fool knows this. He doesn't laugh because he's happy. He laughs because he's walked through pain and come back alive. And in that laughter, there's a kind of wisdom the wise will never touch. Machiavelli may never have written about the jester, but he understood his soul. The man who can mock himself is beyond the reach of control. That is the highest form of freedom. When you can laugh in the dark and make the world fall silent just to hear it. There's a kind of foolishness that destroys men, but there's also a kind that saved the world. It's sacred foolishness, not born from ignorance, but from the courage to believe in something the wise have long stopped believing in. In Machiavelli's time, such people were called fools for God. They were mocked by society, yet possessed something no empire could ever take away. Faith, not religious faith, but faith in what their soul knew was right, even when the entire world said they were wrong. Do you dare to be foolish for something greater than yourself? To love even when you know betrayal is possible? To believe when everyone else has grown cynical? To stand for truth knowing you could be burned for it? The world calls them mad. History calls them prophets. The sacred fool doesn't seek safety. He seeks meaning. And to find meaning, you must sometimes sacrifice your reputation, your status, and your sense of reason. Though Machiavelli was seen as a man of cold pragmatism, he understood this truth deeply. No greatness was ever born from caution. Every reformer, every inventor, every soul that changed the world was once called a fool, because only the fool dares to step outside the order. Only the fool dares to believe in what doesn't yet exist. Only the fool is brave enough to look where others refuse to. But here's a truth few will accept. Every wise man was once a fool. The only difference? They didn't give up halfway. The foolishness of those who dare to believe is the seed of true wisdom. It's the moment you step beyond calculation and let your soul take the lead. You know you might fail, but you still move. You know you might be mocked, but you still speak. You know you might be hurt, but you still love. That's not stupidity. That's wisdom in its raw, fearless form. Untouched by logic, unsoftened by doubt. The sacred fool sees beyond reason. He knows the world isn't driven by logic, but by faith, fear, and desire. And only when you touch that level do you truly understand humanity. Machiavelli once wrote, "A ruler must sometimes believe in what reason calls madness." He said this not because he admired ignorance, but because he knew that real power belongs not to the rational, but to those who dare believe when there's nothing left to believe in. These sacred fools often end up in solitude, but within that solitude they find freedom. No one can control them anymore, because they've crossed the threshold between reason and faith, between man and soul. You can laugh at them, you can doubt them, but you cannot break them, because they don't live to win. They live to serve what they believe is true. And when someone dares to be that foolish, to live fully, to give themselves completely to what they believe, all the limits of intellect, morality, and fear collapse. And in that very moment, the fool steps into the realm of the divine, where foolishness becomes wisdom and faith becomes power. Every great story begins with a foolish act. Someone who leaves everything behind and sets out. Someone who believes in what no one else believes. A soul that walks into the darkness simply because something inside is calling. The world calls them insane, blind, self-destructive, but history calls them beginners. When Machiavelli said, "He who wishes to rule must risk even his honor," he wasn't talking about politics. He was speaking about the art of stepping forward. The wise always wait. They wait until everything is perfect, until they're certain, until they're safe. And so they wait for a lifetime. But the fool, he doesn't need certainty. He only needs that faint voice inside. And one reason that's enough to try. He doesn't know where he's going. He only knows that if he doesn't go, he'll slowly die. And that foolish act becomes the very thing that keeps him alive. Every ancient story begins the same way. The fool sets out. Pacifier leaves home in rough clothes. Don Quixote rides his skinny horse into wind. And in each of them, there's a part of us. Every time we begin something new, we become the fool again. The first time we love, the first time we fail, the first time we dare to leave what's safe. In that moment, we stop being the one who knows and become the one who learns. Machiavelli understood this well. He saw life as a chessboard, and he knew the first move is always the most foolish. But no one ever wins by standing still. Only the one who dares to act in foolishness has a chance to turn mistakes into strategy. When you walk through uncertainty, you learn to see with your soul. When you speak through fear, you learn to hear your inner voice. And when you fall, you learn what the motionless will never know, the weight of experience. You want to be wise? Then allow yourself to look foolish. Because every path to wisdom is paved with mistakes, confusion, and failure. The wise seek shortcuts. The fool walks through the storm, but he's the one who sees the sunrise first. In tarot, the fool is card number 0, both the beginning and the end. He carries nothing but faith. No past, no plan, only a beating heart and trembling steps. Ahead lies the abyss, and yet he walks because he understands not stepping is a real death. Falling at least means living. The fool doesn't win because he's clever. He wins because he's honest with his soul. He dares to admit his ignorance, to fail, to try again, and that raw innocence makes him unstoppable. Machiavelli wrote, "The strong are not those without fear, but those who use fear as their map." That is the fool's journey, the path of everyone brave enough to live truthfully in a world built on pretending. And when you begin your own journey, you'll understand there is no path for those who already know. There's only the path for those foolish enough to begin. Living as a fool isn't easy, because to do it, you must let go of everything you've ever been proud of. You must learn how to forget. Forget how to sound smart. Forget how to please others with your words. Forget how to protect the image you've built of yourself. Because true wisdom doesn't come from adding more. It comes from shedding. Look at the world today. Everyone wants to be seen as deep, knowledgeable, meaningful, valuable. But in that desperate chase for importance, we lose the one thing that makes us truly alive: innocence. Innocence isn't ignorance. It's the ability to see the world as if for the first time. No definitions, no comparisons, no judgment, just looking, feeling, and letting instinct speak to you. The wise man looks at a sunset and says, "The orange hue is caused by the refraction of light." The fool just looks silently and smiles. And in that silence, he lives while the wise man only thinks about living. In the art of life, being a fool is the highest state of awareness. You still know, you still understand, but you choose not to let that understanding kill your wonder. When you dare to say, "I don't know," you open a new space for real wisdom, a wisdom born not from logic, but from presence. Machiavelli knew this when he wrote, "He who understands people need not be wise, only observant." To observe without judgment, that is the art of the fool. He doesn't try to teach the world. He just watches and smiles because he's realized that everyone is playing the same foolish game, just at different levels. And once you understand that, your anger, jealousy, and fear begin to dissolve. You no longer need to prove yourself. You no longer need to argue. You no longer need to win. You just need to see. That is the highest freedom. Freedom from the need to be right. Freedom from the endless war to be better than others. Freedom from compulsion to know. The world is full of people trying to be intelligent, but few who dare to live foolishly. Because living foolishly means living authentically. And living authentically means accepting being misunderstood. Machiavelli once warned, "Do not fear being despised too much. It's the first sign of freedom." The fool doesn't care who laughs at him. He only cares whether he's being honest with himself. And when you live like that, every outside opinion becomes nothing more than passing wind. You become lighter, freer, foolish enough to love, naive enough to forgive, childlike enough to begin again without shame. The art of being a fool doesn't teach you to pretend ignorance. It teaches you to be awake enough that you no longer need to prove your intelligence. That's when you stop performing. When you no longer need walls or masks, there's only presence, raw, real, alive. And in that rawness, you rediscover what the whole world has lost: peace. There comes a moment in life when you realize everything you've done to appear intelligent has only taken you further away from yourself. You've learned how to analyze pain instead of feeling it. You've learned how to speak correctly instead of speaking honestly. You've learned how to be good instead of being free. And one day you find yourself exhausted from living too long inside the shell of understanding. But then comes a moment when everything you know can no longer save you, when reason collapses, when you're forced to admit, I know nothing at all. That isn't failure. That's the beginning of the awakened fool, the one who dares to walk out of the prison of intellect to rediscover raw emotion, curiosity, sincerity, and the sacred madness required to live truly. The awakened fool isn't stupid. He's simply the one who's no longer afraid to look stupid. And because of that, he's freer than everyone else. He doesn't need to win every argument. He doesn't need to appear wise. He only needs to live honestly enough to feel every breath, every ache, every small, beautiful thing. Machiavelli once wrote, "He who truly understands power doesn't need to prove it. He only needs to be present enough for the world to recognize it." The fool is the same. He doesn't prove his wisdom. He embodies in the calmness that makes others question their own chaos. This world doesn't need more intelligent people. It needs people brave enough to be consciously foolish, to love without guarantees, to believe without evidence, to try again after collapsing, to stay silent in the noise, and to laugh when being mocked. Because only when you accept being a fool once, you are born again in the freedom of your soul. The awakened fool understands no wisdom lasts forever, no truth is unshakable, and no intelligent ego is worth more than authenticity. The world may call them mad. History calls them enlightened. Religion calls them saints. And Machiavelli? He called them the only ones who cannot be manipulated. Look within yourself. Every fear of being wrong, of being judged, of being laughed at is just a chain you forge on your own. When you dare be foolish, the chains break. When you dare be wrong, you grow. When you dare not to know, you begin to see. So, if there's one final message to end this journey, it isn't advice. It's a declaration. I no longer wish to be wise. I want to live. I want to feel. I want to be wrong. I want to laugh, to love, to lose, to begin again as a fool, because that's the only way to be real. When you live like that, every fear dissolves because the one who no longer fears being a fool has transcended the judgment of the world. That is the summit of wisdom. No longer the fool, but the awakened one. If you've listened this far, it means your soul is still alive. It means that somewhere within you, a fool is still breathing. The one the world taught to stay silent, to behave, to play it safe. But tonight he's awake. He knows now that intelligence has never made anyone free. Only truth can do that, and truth always looks like foolishness. So don't be afraid if someone calls you a fool. Be afraid if one day you stop being curious. Stop loving. Stop being reckless. Stop feeling. The wise live by reason, but the awakened fool lives by the soul. And in this world, the soul is the only thing that can never be controlled. If you feel ready, let every act of pretending fall away. Step out of your role and return to being human, because true wisdom begins the moment you dare to be a fool. If you understand this, you've already gone farther than 90% of the world. Leave just one dot in the comments. Not for attention, but to let the world know you still dare to be foolish, to be different, to be real. In an age where everyone pretends to be intelligent, don't leave just yet, because the Machiavelli journey has only begun. The next video is waiting for you on the other side of wisdom.